Welcome everybody to DEOL 738. We've had a difficult time since March. We've had a lot of loss. Our prayers for Kim. I lost my mother to COVID along the way in April. She was 90 years old. She did have cancer. Her time was short, but she got COVID and lasted 20 hours back in April. I was in quarantine for 4 weeks around her death. We had to do the COVID funeral and those things, but that's that loss doesn't compare to Kim's. I understand that. I can't imagine. I've only been married for 35 years, but I love her more than my next breath. I can't imagine losing her. So I'm going to take a point of privilege this morning, and I'm going to pray. This is my favorite prayer. It has been for, I guess, all of my adult life. You might have heard it before, but it's a good one for today. So if you'll pray with me. Oh God, we thank thee for thy church founded on thy word that challenges us to do more than sing and pray, but to go out and work as though the very answer to our prayers depended upon us and not upon thee. Help us to realize that man was created to shine like the stars and live through all eternity. Keep us, we pray, in perfect peace. Help us to walk together, pray together, sing together, and live together until the day when all God's children, black, white, red, and yellow, will rejoice in one common band of humanity in the kingdom of our Lord and our God, we pray. Amen. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So, moving on, we've had a significant problem. You probably folks have already detected that with Blackboard this semester, and it's a usage problem. Now that we're predominantly online with Gardner Webb, we've had Blackboard problems to that end. I recently discovered that although you folks have been keeping up with your discussion boards, you've not been able to see my comments or my feedback. And I've had to go in, and I think it'll probably show this morning, but I finally got Blackboard to get it fixed, or our Blackboard person. So you should see my feedback on all of your posts today. I've been making them, you just hadn't been seeing them. I didn't know that. I thought ours was fixed, but it wasn't. And so I got it fixed yesterday. So it'll probably show today's date, but I have turned all those, gone in manually and turned all the comments on that I made previously. And so it'll show today. Now, I figure I'm going to have to do the same thing. When you go in and look, if you don't see a grade, that means I'm going to have to go in and turn the grades on manually as well. That automated piece somehow got knocked out. And so we're having to do that manually now until they get that fixed. And so I'll get your grades in today as well. At sometime during break or this evening, I'll go in and turn the grades on manually. I have to turn each drop box on for each student manually. It takes quite a while to do that. But that automated piece is not working. We did not know that. It's not just my course. A lot of courses kind of randomly around the university, that function is not working. So I apologize for that. If I'd known it, I would have turned them on. Now, I'm guessing I'm going to have to continue to do that as well. I'll have to go in manually and do that. But that's okay. The important part is that you folks are keeping up, you're doing your work, and I appreciate that. So what we're going to do today is we'll get today and tomorrow's work done today. That won't be a problem. I'll limit my comments and my work. Since you folks have been keeping up with your discussion boards, it'll go much faster. And so let me share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started this morning. Now you'll have to help me stay on time. I have these things patterned out how much time they take, and I've got to be a little faster today. So keep me on time. So let me share my screen.
We'll ask Jackie to be the timekeeper.
Yes, we need a timekeeper. I've always had a timekeeper. Even when I did faculty meetings as a principal, I appointed a timekeeper. When the time came, everybody's got, and he rang the bell, everybody just got up and left me. So our first break is at 10:15. And so let me roll back up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover Saturday, September 5th, and Sunday, September 6th today. So first thing I want to do is, so that covers the schedule. Case study notes. You're already doing your case studies. You know how that works. Today, when we do case study 16, we got two groups. Group 1 will go first. Group 2 will go second. Now, today, the way it works is, and then tomorrow when we do 16A, 2 will go first and then 1. You kind of get that system. Now, the first group that goes has to give us all the background and everything that goes with the case study. The second group doesn't have to repeat all of it. You can just get to the central problem and what you did. So that saves a lot of time as well. We normally do it that way anyway. We don't need to hear the setup of the case each time. When we hear it, the first group that presents, when they present the setup, the second group can kind of speed through that. So that saves a good bit of time as well. And then after today, after you present and we talk about these cases, that's when your half-page reflection. Don't go over a half page. Give us the half-page reflection. Make sure you've completed that on what you learned through the process. All right. Anybody have any questions on case studies? All right. So we're going to start on terms this morning. I've got a cheat sheet on terms in there. It's the one that says terms and definitions. Normally I don't give you that, but because of our compacted schedule this semester, we will be working. I did put that one in for you that has these. And so we're going to start with terms this morning. And we work through all these terms. And when we work through all these terms, it will cover most of the things that we cover in the chapters as we go through. So we'll start out with qualitative and quantitative this morning. Qualitative is not my area. I am a quantitative person. However, later in my professional life, I did spend a year with the Gallup organization, learning to be a quantitative data gatherer and an analyst. They call that becoming a perceiver, because there's more to qualitative than just asking questions and waiting for verbal responses. So I do have some experience professionally as a qualitative person. I won't tell you that I'm as expert as Dr. Hamilton, who is in his professional life a phenomenologist. I am an inferential statistician. And so hopefully you will learn the difference in the two, and that you will understand that you really need to broaden and be broader than just being one or the other, that there's a richness in data that you can only get from qualitative, and I understand that, and that for the purposes of this course, in your methodology and in your project, you will do mixed methodology. You will do a convergent design where you gather quantitative data, usually through survey, and then you do some qualitative work that kind of explains or paints in those outlines. That's called a convergent design, where you collect data from two different sources and then compare them to make sure that they're consistent. That's kind of the heart of our first case study when we get to that later this morning that we'll talk about. So let's jump right into quantitative. Quantitative comes from a validated measure. It's something that we can count. We most commonly just describe that data with mean, median, and mode. Those are called measures of central tendency. Mean being the average, median being the middle of the range, mode being the most repeated number. We can apply statistical analysis to those numbers, analysis of variance. We can do linear regressions. We can create algorithms. That's just calculus. So remember, quantitative data comes from a validated measure. It's not opinion. Now you say, but Dale, we do surveys, which are people's opinion, and we call that quantitative. Well, we can't do analysis of variance or linear regression. What we do with that is we just report how often numbers appear or answers appear, and we assume that those are the correct answer. And so although we can't apply those statistical concepts, we can do chi-square, which would compare that group to what we would expect to find in a normal distribution. So survey data is quantitative because we can apply chi-square to it. So if we had a group that we went out and asked them their opinion and we didn't have a group to compare them to, we would run a chi-square to compare them to a theoretical model of what we would expect to find in a random distribution of people. So that is the caveat to understanding quantitative, that we will allow survey, but we can't say this definitively that this is the right or wrong answer because it's still opinion data. So we cannot run analysis of variance or do a linear regression out of survey data. We can only do chi-square compared to what we think we ought to have found in a random distribution. Now, like say a test that has correct answers like we use in the school business, we can run an analysis of variance on that, and that's the basis of EVOS. The growth model that's used in public schools is we take test data, historical test data, that has independent variables attached to it, and we'll talk about that later, and we can tell how much variance that each of those independent variables has on the score. That's how we do prediction scores for how much score an individual kid has to make to show a year's growth in the school business. We do the same thing in other businesses as well. So quantitative is a set of numbers that comes from a validated measure. Qualitative is interviews, observations, and documents. We interview people. We do focus groups. And that's why I said the year that I spent with Gallup, the whole notion of qualitative is to try to perceive what people feel or think. And it's verbal and nonverbal clues. In my opinion, the best way to use both qualitative and quantitative, as I said earlier, is in a convergent design where we do them independently. And then we compare the results to see if the results kind of match. And that gives us, we're a lot more confident in our findings that way. Now, let me be clear. In mixed methodology, you cannot mix your methods. You have to observe the proper technique for each of those separately. For example, if you sampled 1,000 people in the survey, we would expect that you would get a return rate of at least 40% for those numbers to be reliable. You can't interview 40% or 400 people. You would interview maybe 10 of those. So the same protocols do not apply to qualitative as quantitative. Again, what we do, we sample the larger population. Population is everybody. The sample is the group we pull out. But the rules are different for a sample when you're doing quantitative and qualitative. Again, you need at least 40% in a quantitative to run any kind of analysis. Qualitative, you don't need nearly that many. 1% is plenty if you're just going to talk to them. But you have to be careful. I had a student that came to me recently and said, I've got an issue here where we did a random sample of 100 people, except the problem is we got twice as many women as men. And I said, well, you know, if you want to, that's okay, as long as you don't speak to the differences between men and women, because you don't have equivalent groups. Now, what you should have done was a random stratified sample where you made sure that you got 50 men and 50 women to respond. You would have stratified your bigger population into two groups, male and female, binary, and then you would have gotten an equal number from both if you want to compare men to women. Now, if you're not interested in that comparative basis, you get whoever you get. Now, you understand that if you randomly flip a coin 10 times, it won't automatically come up 5 heads and 5 tails. And so when you randomly sample a population like she did of 1,000, you're not going to come up with, you know, you're going to pull out 100 of those. You're not going to come up with 50 and 50. That's, you know, you'd have to have 1 million or more chances in order to get them roughly equivalent. She got, you know, 2 to 1 women. Well, then you can't compare men to women because you don't have equal groups. So when we talk about sampling, let me pull that one up right quick. Random means that everybody has a chance, but you're just talking about the people of the population. You're not going to make a distinction between male, female, young, old. But now, but if you want to talk about those differences, you have got to make sure you set it up that way. How we can analyze data depends on how we collected it, especially in quantitative. If we want to compare the average score of men to women, we got to make sure that when we sample that we get an equal number. The only way to do that is stratify. We separate our men and our women, we pull equal numbers from them. That's a stratified sample. We had a situation at Gardner-Webb. I went to a data meeting. They have what's called the surveyors group, the data people at Gardner-Webb. And they pull us in from time to time to talk about data and things that want to be done for the university. And so what they said is we want to get more freshman students to enroll at Gardner-Webb. We want to know why, you know, why people came to Gardner-Webb, and we want to use that to try to get more students to come. All right, you folks have been keeping up with this course. We're midway through. What's wrong with that scenario? Talking about population and sample now. We're going to survey our freshman class through our University 111 classes, which every freshman is enrolled in, and we're going to ask them why they came, and we're going to use that data to try to figure out how to get more students. What's wrong with that scenario from the perspective of population and sample?
Are you looking at, because we need to look at multiple samples? I'm trying to remember the reading on that, but it was something dealing with multiple samples of the groups, something like that. Yeah.
All right. Are the students who came to Gardner-Webb the same as the ones who didn't? That's a different population, isn't it?
Yes.
We're pulling a sample from the population who came to try to infer inferential statistics, something about those who didn't come. Or is that the same population? No. When we're looking at admission to a college, that is our determinant variable. That's an outcome variable. They came or they didn't come. That's the outcome. We're trying to affect that outcome. So who applied is just a process variable. Who comes is an outcome variable. All right, we're trying to impact who comes. So we're sampling the people who came, and we want to infer information from them on the group that didn't come. Is that is that proper quantitative methodology? That would be no. That's a sample and population error. The group that didn't come is a different group or population than the group that did come. If we want to know why people didn't come, we can't ask the people who did. Who should we ask?
The people who didn't come.
The people who didn't come. And so I said, well, wait a minute. This data from these people who came has nothing to do with the people who didn't come.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they said, but we've got these people here on campus. We can ask them. That's what's known as a convenience sample. Let me go back to a share here. Participants are selected on the basis of proximity. Problem is they didn't have anything to do with the outcome variable. Yeah, they were 18-year-olds, the same as the ones that came. But the outcome variable is, did they come to Gardner-Webb or not? That's what put them in that population. And so one of the things that we really do to further our own narratives a lot of times is we use convenience samples, and they don't have anything to do with what we're trying to determine. That's our biggest mistake. The whole world boils down to population and sample, folks. The whole world boils down to population and sample. If you start out on the wrong foot, you can't ever get on the right foot. So their notion was, we'll ask people who came why other people didn't come. They have no clue why the other crowd didn't come. They wouldn't have any better idea than I would. And I'm not an 18-year-old freshman. I could guess just as well as they could, but they wanted to ask these people why the other people didn't come. The appropriate thing, that's a convenience sample. The appropriate thing would be to ask the ones who didn't come, why didn't you come? They said, well, what can we glean from this data? Well, I said, I can get that for you right quick. 80% of the students who enrolled as freshmen in that class, I think that was fall of 2018 or 19. I've slept since then. I said, if you look at this data, I said, 80% of your kids came, are affiliated with the Baptist church within 100 miles from here. If you want more students like you got, you just got to work the Baptist churches, meeting over. That wasn't really hard. And they all sat and looked what we're going to do for the next 2 hours that we had scheduled for this meeting. We're going to go back and do some real work now. We're done.
So Dr. Lamb, would it be easier when freshmen are coming in, whether if they decline the offer, just to go and automatically have a box there of why they decline?
Absolutely. That's exactly what you would do. Because that population is the ones that turns you down. That's who you're trying to get to. You don't just randomly select 18-year-olds and say, why didn't you come to Gardner-Webb? Because they weren't considering Gardner-Webb. The bigger population here is 18-year-olds, but that's not the relevant population. We're talking about ones who applied to Gardner-Webb. That's the population. And then we have to stratify that into two, the ones who came and the ones who didn't come. Asking the ones who came why the others didn't come is of no value. They don't know any more than I do or you do. If you want to know why somebody didn't come, you ask. If you want to know, you ask. That's one of those truisms or Dale's notes about data. If you want to know, ask. If you don't want to know, don't ask. Because the data is the data. And the second one is, that goes along with that is write it down. If you can't remember, write it down. And we can. That means gather that data in a concrete way. Don't do it anecdotally. Systematically gather that data the proper way. Write it down. So if you want to know, you ask, but you got to ask the relevant person. The biggest mistake in data collection, quantitative, is through population and sample. That's where you get the most error. You don't ask the right people the right questions. And it starts out with having a convenient sample. We got access to these people. Well, you know, what you should have done at the time that they declined acceptance, you should have right then asked them why they're declining. Now, I wouldn't ask it open-ended because they won't bother to do that. I'd simply have it in a bullet format, you know, most likely reasons, and then maybe a blank at the bottom. But I would, that way I could summarize why they didn't come. What would be number one? Be cost. I didn't come because of the cost. What does data tell us about since 2008? What's the biggest determinant of college choice since 2008? What happened in 2008? Y'all are all adults. What happened in 2008?
We had a recession.
Recession
Oh, boy, did we
and
have a
election of
recession.
Obama.
Oh boy, did we have a recession. It changed college forever. COVID has just magnified what was already there, that colleges were just hanging on by a thread. Gardner-Webb is losing about $4.5 million a year.
Mm.
Discount rate is so high for undergraduates, graduate can't cover it anymore. We're losing $4.5 million a year, have been for years now. The model changed in 2008. Biggest determinant of whether you go to college or especially a private college is cost now. So that would be one of the options. That'd be one of the choices that that'd be the first choice I'd give them. You didn't come to Gardner-Webb because of cost. Is that it? What other factors? This is all anecdotal from your experiences. What other reasons, but we could read about it in the literature. What other reasons might you have for not coming to Gardner-Webb? Now,
Well,
cost.
you're speaking from a, go ahead.
Cost includes I didn't get the scholarship. I thought I was going to get a scholarship. Okay, so I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tawanda.
Proximity, location.
Absolutely.
Well, if you're speaking from an undergrad, but go ahead. I'm sorry. Go
What
ahead.
happens? What happens when 70% of the parents and students visit Gardner-Webb? What happens when they come and see where Gardner-Webb is? That's the only visit they make. Proximity, location. Anybody ever been to the campus in Bowling Springs?
It's
Uh-huh.
It's cute.
It's cute. It's like
Well,
1950s, isn't it?
It looks like a village, and
Yeah.
probably there are not too many places for 18-year-old, 19-year-old to go and have fun.
That would be no places.
Oh, no place.
No places. Zero. Zero places.
It's what I would call a suitcase campus, but really
Yeah.
it's not even a suitcase campus because people probably leave more often than the weekends.
Yeah, I mean, they come and go, commuters during the day, and it is a suitcase college. You can lay down in the road on Friday, you won't get run over. They all leave on Thursday. Now, you better not be in the park, you better not be in the road on Thursday evening. They'll run over you because everybody leaves on Thursday. And they come in on 2 wheels on Monday. Just in time, they park in the road just in time and run in class and just leave their car running in the road. They show up on Monday in time for class. As soon as their last class is over on Thursday. Friday classes, they don't meet, or if they do, they're empty. There's
Dr. Lamb,
to do.
when I was driving to the campus and I saw the road, I was in the car alone and I was telling myself, look at this road. It doesn't even look like it's going to a university. It looks like a farm road.
Yeah, you think you're going to hit a footpath before you get there.
Yeah.
I know. Well, I'll give you the example where I'm in Lake Norman today. I'm in quarantine most of the time, but then I scrub down and come home every now and then. So I'm at home. Directly behind me, about 200 feet, the next house over. Dave and Gina live there. They've lived there for 23 years. They've lived there, right next door to me. They're our best friends. Wonderful people. They're about 10 years younger than my wife and I. But I held both of their children in my arms when they brought them home from the hospital. One is 23 and the other is 20. They're 22 and 20. And so the boy he's a senior at Virginia Tech. She is a sophomore at Virginia. She's a world-class soccer player. She was two-time North Carolina Player of the Year. And she's a scholarship baby at Virginia. She'll play professionally. And so I said that to say this. He was not a very good athlete, but decent. His sister is the best female athlete in the state. And so, but he was a very good student. But he did play baseball a little bit. So some of the small colleges were recruiting him for baseball. Not so much because they thought he'd ever see the field, but he's a genius student. His GPA would help out the team average and keep all the dumb kids that can play eligible. That's the way it works in NCAA and Division I, if you didn't know that. It goes by team GPA, and so you have to – it's just like them 5 tall white boys at the end of Carolina's bench that never see the court on the basketball team. They've been there forever. My friend Byron, his son, was one of them. They never see the court. But, their job is to make a 4.0 every semester to keep everybody else eligible. Well, baseball's the same way. And so he was recruited in baseball by Gardner Webb. Joel lives right behind me here. So him and his dad go over there, and Joel wouldn't even stay for the tour. He was like Buku. He was afraid that they were going to have to get out and walk before they got there. He'd never seen a place that rural in his life. He grew up here in the northern suburbs of Charlotte, where the houses, I can throw a rock and hit 8 or 10 houses from mine. And we live in one of the more dispersed neighborhoods. But, you go there, there's nothing for anybody to do. So the first reason would be cost. The second, exactly right, is proximity. And so those are factors in college enrollment. And so that didn't obviously factor into the decision people who came. We got to know why people didn't come. Now, the girl, Ashlyn, she didn't go because Gardner Webb doesn't have a nationally recognized soccer team. So maybe that's it. The program that you're in or the reason you're going, that's number 3. What is your state and national ranking in the thing that matters to a student, athletics or academics? It's one or the other. So that's number 3. And so that's what I mean. You put these choices. You don't just make it open-ended and random. Did you not come because of the cost? Did you not come because of the location? Did you not come because of the program? We need to know those things. And there's about 5, I wouldn't go more than about 5 reasons. Do a quick survey when they decline their enrollment, have a Qualtrics pop up with one question, just one. They don't even have to elaborate.
Is this in place now, Dr. Lamb?
No, this is what I want. This is what I'm advocating for. This is what I'm trying to get put in right now. Why didn't you come? But they don't, but see now, why do you think Gardner Webb doesn't want to ask that question? Kim, you said something.
I don't think they really want to know the answer.
They don't. If you don't, again, the corollary to if you want to know, you ask. The corollary is, and this is what we say every day at Gardner Webb, if you don't want to know, you don't ask. Especially me, because I'll tell you. Because I do data. I just tell you what the numbers are. Numbers don't have value attached to them. See, that's the part of this you've got to understand. That's why this long-winded this morning. You have to understand. The numbers are the numbers. You can't attach emotion or feeling or people's, I'm gonna hurt somebody's feeling if I tell them the truth. The data is simply the data. And if you can't get over that hurdle, you can't use data effectively in your professional life. If you're worried about whose ox it's going to gore, my ox analogy. The ox analogy is you're supposed to go to church on Sunday, but you know, the Bible says if your ox is in the ditch, if it's an emergency, you can miss. But if your ox is in the ditch every Sunday, then that's not an emergency. You need a new ox. So I used to tell people who weren't performing, you know, when work for me, you know, it's about time for a new ox here. Well, you know, to extend that analogy is we're afraid it's going to go over somebody's ox. We're going to have to get a new ox. It points out who isn't doing their job. That's the whole point of data, is to find out performance. What are you doing? Just like this course at the very end, we get to Royce. We're supposed to put all this together that we learn all semester long. And in the end, what do we do with it? We do program evaluation. We call people out or programs out that are, you know, that aren't doing what they're supposed to be in an organizational sense. Why do you think, you know, you're working to become consultants? Why do you think somebody calls a consultant? 99% of the time, they already know what the problem is. They just don't want to say it because they have to work with those people every day. What's the beauty of being a consultant? You can come in and tell them what the problem is and leave. Now, I do not encourage my folks, just like you folks are mine, and you've heard me say, I don't encourage you to stay and put the action plan in place that you come up with or the strategic plan for them, because, you know, that's when the conflict starts. You know, the beauty of a consultant is you come in, you do your data analysis, you present your findings, you do, you know, then you present your recommendations or your action plan or your strategic plan for a solution, and then you get your check and go home. If you stay, it's going to get ugly. They already knew what the problem was before you came. Gardner Webb already knows they charge way too much. They already know that. But what would they have to do, Donald, in order to get the cost to where they're supposed to be?
Some people will not be happy because they will no longer be there.
125 people got to go home. It's just that simple. If we look back to 2007, 2008, when we had the highest enrollment ever at Gardner Webb, we had 400 employees. That's faculty and staff. We now have 600 less students, undergraduate, but we have 125 more employees. How does that happen? What happened was Gardner Webb stopped being, you know, there's 4 types of organizations. Professional. Gardner Webb stopped being a professional organization and became a patronage organization because of.
Became a what, Dr. Lamb?
A patronage organization.
Oh, okay.
What is a patronage organization? We're there for we run the organization for the people who work there. Our job is to hire people in the community because we've lost jobs everywhere else. Our job is to provide our goal, our mission, our vision is to provide jobs. We can have this beautiful mission and vision statements about we're going to prepare leaders and we're going to be servants of Christ and all those things, pro Deo et humanitate, for God and humanity. But what happens is when you become a patronage organization, you simply perpetuate the organization and provide jobs. Your first clue to a patronage organization is when you get a grievance email and it says so-and-so is going to get surgery, and it lists their connection to the university, and there's 7 people that work there, their brother, their sister, their cousin, their aunt, their uncle. That's your first clue. Your second clue on a patronage organization is there's no evaluation system in place of any kind. Do you realize that your student opinion of instruction is really the only feedback that's given on my instruction? What's our core competency at Gardner Webb, at any teaching college? What's our core competency? What's our sausage? You know what?
Should it be teaching and learning?
That would be teaching and learning. When you go around the curve in Raleigh on 40, the outer loop, and you turn south on 40, you know, 40 goes west to east till you get to Raleigh, then it turns south and goes to Wilmington. And after you go around the curve and go from west to east and start going from north to south, the The first exit on the right when you get down there to exit 306, backside of Garner, is Jones Sausage Road. You know what they do at Jones Sausage? They make sausage. That's in the title. That's kind of, we hold some truths to be self-evident. What do we do at a teaching college, Don? We do teaching and learning. How is it that our core competency we don't even assess? Do we have any kind of staff development to make ourselves better teachers? No. Is there any kind of performance metrics of any kind? None. First thing, we hire all of our relatives and friends. We just create jobs because we can. That's our. And the second is the people that we hire, because we didn't hire them for their competence, their skill, their ability, we don't put any kind of a performance assessment in place. I mean, there's some other things that I could get into in patronage organization, but those are the two biggies. The biggest of those being we have no kind of performance assessment involved with a patronage organization. So the reason why we don't ask people why they don't come, because they know they're going to tell us cost, because that would portend that 125 people would have to go home tomorrow. Now, when I was on the select budget committee, that was my agenda every meeting, is we need to do zero-sum budgeting. If you don't have any majors or any students majoring in what you're taking, then we need to close, you need to go home. I finally got, in my third year, I got a promise that we'd cut $1.5 million out of the budget through faculty and staff salaries. 2 days later, I got an email, we're not going to do that. I can't help you then. You're losing $4.5 million a year because you got too many people on the payroll. What's 85% of organizations? What's 85% of their budget, their cost? Personnel, people. So when you're losing money on every student you take in, enrollment's not the issue. The more students you get, the more money you lose. We lose money on every undergraduate student. We no longer can cover it up on the graduate side. So you have to, and then when you're having, our enrollment has stayed steady at 400 for the last several years. But that's also misleading. What have we had to do over the last 12 years in order to keep our undergraduate enrollment each year, the new freshman class coming in the fall at 400? What have we had to do? We've had to increase our discount rate, how much we actually charge. And so 12 years ago when we got that 400, our average discount rate was 30%. This year it touched 70% discount rate to get that 400. Again, that's a manipulation of the scale. Yes, we stayed at 400. Yes, it looks like, and we actually bumped up a few extra this year. Looks like things are on the uptick, but we had to use some COVID money to give some kids free scholarship to get that. But our discount rate's at 70%. So has our enrollment really remained constant over 12 years? No, not in real terms. Again, these are all things that this course is supposed to help you with, these kind of real life things. Again, understanding population and sample. You can't ask kids who came why they didn't come. The reason why we're not asking kids why they didn't come is because we know the answer is going to be cost. Number one, proximity. Can we change where we are? No. Could we offer programs and fun things to do? Back when my wife was an undergraduate at Gardner-Webb in the late 70s, they had concerts. They had all kind of weekend things there. They had big name bands who came. For those of you who know who the registrar is, Miss Skates, her dad was the dean of students there, and that's what he did. They put on all kinds of, they had a community of entertainment and things for students to do. You didn't go home every weekend. Why don't we do that now? We don't want to. We have people who are hired in those roles, but they'd have to work. guess what? They'd have to work nights and weekends. When would all these activities occur that if we did things for kids to get them to stay on campus? That would be nights and weekends.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't we do those things now? Because we'd have to stay nights and weekends. What's the downside, of all the jobs I ever had, and I was thinking last night about all the jobs I ever had, the best job I ever had was elementary school principal. I didn't know it at the time, 30 years ago. The worst job I ever had was high school principal. I didn't know it at the time. Why was it the worst job ever? I never got to go home. I slept 4 hours a day. I was physically at my house between 6 and 7 hours a day. I got up every morning at 4:30 and was on the road and was at work at 6. I left at 11 every night at the earliest. Charlotte Mecklenburg, high schools are early start. Kids are in class. We're teaching at 7. They start rolling on campus at 6:20. We got out at 2:15, 15 minutes to get them off. Study hall started at 2:30, 3 o'clock, second shift start, 3 to 11. After school activities. 4A high school, which now would be 4AA high school, 3,000 kids. Can you imagine how many activities we had going on? All the different sports, all the different clubs, all the different groups. Weekends, you got tournaments, ball games, wrestling, you got all those kinds of things, nights and weekends. What happens to you after about 5 years of that? You can't burn the candle at both ends. The reason why we're a suitcase college is the people who work there don't want to work nights and weekends. And that's when you'd have to do all these events to make it not be a suitcase college. We're not going to do that. Again, we didn't hire them for their skill or ability. We hired them because they were relatives or because they needed a job. That's part of the problem with patronage organizations as well. You don't hire people for their skill or ability or their determination, their work ethic. You hire them because the convenience of hiring or because they were relatives. And so at some time, when Lou Ann's dad retired and all the things that they had going on are really involved intramural program with athletics. They had a lot of other social things happening. They had bands, they had music, they had events. All of that went away. Donald, did you raise your hand?
So one of the things that I was going to say was that I recall when I interviewed the 3 times there, and I would go into different offices and I would see on the wall, Gardner Webb. And I said to myself, oh, I don't fit in here because I don't have a degree from Gardner Webb.
That's correct.
And then when I would share or ask people about their journey, I would usually hear, I applied to 20 places and they gave me a chance.
Yeah.
But so quick question. So how is the system set up so that one, leadership stays the same or doesn't change, or leadership, what evaluation type materials, or because if I'm understanding, the board evaluates the president, and then
yes.
The president evaluates the deans, and
right.
Then the deans evaluate the chairs, and the chairs evaluate their faculty.
That's correct.
And that evaluation tool is sort of subjective, or is it numbers?
Well, the problem at Gardner Webb is we fill out our own. We don't have, that's why I said we don't have an evaluation system of any kind. We have to do, we get evaluated every year, and I evaluate the 31 people that work for me, but we let them design their own instrument, and we let them rate themselves. How valid is that? Validity means it measures what it's supposed to measure. If we let you do a self-evaluation, how valid is a self-evaluation instrument?
Well, shouldn't self-evaluation, as far as when you're looking at the data, making sure self-evaluation is making sure the person is learning, and what other things that they need to have professional development to help themselves learn. And then the other part of the peer review would be picking somebody else, whether it be a random person, well, not a random, but somebody who is close to you as far as knowing what work you do, and making sure that you are doing what is said needs to be done, or what's in your policy and what's in your job description.
All right, so let's break that down for a minute here. Our first case study,
Mm-hmm.
it's about evaluating nonprofit organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And what we learned in that case study is you know, when we're trying to satisfy different entities, they have different measures of what's successful. So the first thing that we have to agree upon is what is important, what is success, what is performance. And then we have to create a document that becomes an instrument to, that's reliable and valid, that measures that. And then we have to put a system in place for staff development to work with people in order to achieve those metrics. Now, that was when the president had some meeting, I'm trying to remember what it was and called all the department chairs and people in over at Tucker Center, it was about the strategic plan. I was concerned that our strategic plan does not even it has 4 pillars, and none of those 4 pillars have anything to do with teaching and learning. We do not have a pillar in our strategic plan for teaching and learning. Let me say it again. We're a teaching college. We do not have a pillar in our strategic plan about teaching and learning. And I pointed that out and that we needed to do that, and that we had CETL, which is the Center for Teaching and Learning, over in the basement of the library, that is set up to do that professional development to teach people how to teach. Because you have content knowledge doesn't mean a thing about teaching.
Sure.
That our strategic plan, the first pillar in our strategic plan should be teaching and learning. Again, that's our sausage. That's what we do. It's what people pay us for. Not even our strategic plan. We have a system set up, but because that's not part of our strategic plan, we don't have any real metrics about performance, and we don't have any real instruments. You get to design your own. It just has 4 areas. Let me see if I can pull mine up right quick. Sure. Okay, let me go here, and let me go here. Let's see. I better do date. Here we go. And so all I have to do is I have a section under teaching, mentoring, professional, and service to the university, the community. I get to pick whatever I want let's go back up here to teaching. I get to pick my own goals. I get to present my own data. I get to reflect myself on how well I did and set my goals next year. I can pick the things that I'm good at, and I can exclude the things I'm bad at if I choose to. Okay. And so you notice mine have actual numbers in mine. And when people read mine, they're like, oh, boy, you've set yourself up for failure. Well, no. So my teaching goals for last year was to be in the top 15 teaching awards for the university. They do a top 15 every semester of who the best teachers are. My goal was to be in the top 15. And my goal is for my program that I'm coordinator of to score 85% or better net promoter score of how many students would recommend the program. Our net promoter was 94.12, which is above world class for the largest graduate program at Gardner Webb, the largest graduate MSA program in North or South Carolina. we have a net promoter score of 94.12. That's, you know, people said, well, Dale, you realize with as many students as you got that 85% is impossible. No, it's not. Remember, the tails of you have the y-axis and the x-axis, and then you have a bell-shaped curve. The tails can never touch the x-axis. If they touch, that means something would be impossible. Now, it may be not probable. The whole world's, you know, probability is the basis of all statistics. It's the basis of the world. I do all the prop bets at Gardner Webb. That's my area, is probability, putting all the data together and figure out, you know, it's possible that my hair will grow back. It's not probable. It's not impossible though. If the tails of the curve touch the x-axis, then that means that something would be impossible. It's not. It might be lottery odds 1 billion to 1, but there's always that one chance. So you're saying I got a chance. You know, so the notion here is, yes, 85%, with the more people you have, the more likely you are not to make it. But if we don't strive for excellence, and so a lot of this one is rare in that most people don't actually put a performance metric in, you know. But you know, if we're going to actually grow, there's going to be some pain in that. So we were at 94.12 on our completers. How many said that they would recommend the program? All right. So my goal was to earn, you know, the top 15 teaching award all 3 semesters. Now I'm going to say this, and it sounds boastful, but it's actually sad. It's kind of embarrassing. I have worked at Gardner Webb since I retired from public school. I have taught, this is my 31st semester teaching at Gardner Webb. I have taught and completed 30 semesters, 30. We do a top 15. How many of those semesters do you think I have been out of the top 15? How many have I been out of the top 10? How many have I been out of the top 5? That would be 0. I have 30 straight semesters in the top 5 teaching at Gardner Webb. 30 straight. Now, you say, Dale, you've thrown your shoulder out, patting yourself on the back. Nope. The problem is I have no competition. Nobody cares. There's not but 2 or 3 people. I only got to beat 2 or 3 people. You know, if the bear's chasing me and Donald, I ain't got to be faster than the bear. I just got to be faster than Donald. That's the way it works at Gardner Webb. I only got to beat 2 or 3 people every semester to be in the top 5, because there's only about 7 people that it matters to. Okay. In the whole university, there's only about 7 people that it matters how well they teach. Mm-hmm. They don't care. They're not punished. They're not rewarded for teaching.
Are they long-term?
Yeah.
Long-termers?
Yeah, they're in my age bracket.
Okay.
Many of them, it's the only job they've ever had, been there 30 or 40 years, and never won a teaching award, never been in the top 15 in 40 years. How do you keep somebody 40 years that has never broke the seal, that's never scratched? It's not important. That's the only conclusion that you can draw from the data. We've got people there that are in departments that have maybe 1 or 2 majors, that graduate one or two people. We've got a department that has graduated 2 people in the last 5 years. We've got 11 departments. We've got 11 that have not graduated an average of 1 student a year for 5 years, that have graduated less than 5 students in 5 years. So we don't go on quantity, we don't go on quality. Isn't that the basis of our first case study? That you've got to do quantity and quality if you're going to satisfy the people that are giving you money in a nonprofit. Like, say we're running the homeless shelter in Shelby. the county commissioners that give you money, they're interested in how many people you serve. The United Way and other charitable organizations like churches, they're more interested in how well you serve the ones that you get. But you've got to be able to do both. At the university, the whole notion of a teaching college is how many kids or students you get, not kids. How many students do you get in your program, and how well do you serve them? But if you have an evaluation system that doesn't measure, or neither one of those matters, that's a patronage organization. All we're interested in is keeping people jobs. So why do you think we don't ask students why they don't come? Because cost is going to be the first thing they tell us. We're not willing to cut employees, so we don't want to know. Second thing they're going to say is there's nothing to do there. Well, that means the people that you hired to do all these jobs, over in student life, they don't want to have to work nights and weekends, so they don't want to hear that. And the ones who didn't come because your programs didn't make the U.S. News and World Report national rankings or state rankings, they don't want to hear that. Poor teaching and people been there forever. They don't want to hear that. And so the reason why we don't ask students why they don't come, and we have the process that we could ask them, we don't ask them because we don't want to know. We don't want to know.
But also too, Dr. Lamb, sometimes when people don't want to ask questions, is that they don't have an answer to, or they're not willing to go that step in order to solve the problem or to address the issues.
Yeah, sometimes it's real hard to get to that data. But in this case, we know who applied. It's not like we would just be sending out a random survey, one question survey to all 18-year-olds. These are the people who actually applied to Gardner-Webb. We know who they are, and they have become that outcome variable. They're in the population that didn't come, and that's who we want to look at. If we want to get more, we got to know why the ones who had some interest in us enough to apply didn't come. But you're right, we don't have a process in place to get to that population, or we don't want them, we can't or won't make those changes. And so the way that we don't go down that road is we don't ask, because we don't want data laying around that points things out that is unacted upon. So that's one of the first things that I want to tell you, because by the time we get through with this course, we want to have some methodology in place. Your final project this semester is qualitative and quantitative. Put it together, and that's your methodology for your consultancy. If you don't want to know, don't ask. Make sure that that you understand the political lay of the land in the organization that you're in. Don't kick over anthills by trying to gather data that they don't want gathered, that they don't want publicized. That's and I've got 2.5 minutes here, and I'll give my story that concludes this section.
Okay.
So my wife worked at Table Rock up in the mountains, one of our stops in one of the counties where I was principal. My wife worked at Table Rock. She worked with a girl named Ramona. Ramona lived way back up in the woods, about 4 miles past where the pavement is, on a dirt road. It was so far back up in the woods that even the Presbyterians handled snakes. And so they got a new preacher she was a Pentecostal holiness church, and they got a new preacher. And he came in and he was giving his first sermon, and man, he was blowing it out. We're what we are going to do and what we aren't going to do, and as a church and a community and a congregation. And man, they were just amening him just on and on and on, until he said, and we're going to stop making and drinking white liquor. And a hush fell over the crowd. And finally, the chairman of the deacon stood up and said, wait a minute now, preacher. Said, you stop preaching and now you're meddling. And so that's the risk that you run in organizations is that you hit that nerve that goes back to their core competency. The core competency at Gardner Webb is not teaching and learning. The core competency is providing jobs. And you have to understand that when you're the consultant. You have to figure that out. Nobody's going to tell you that piece. Your data will tell you that, though, if you know how to read what's there and, more importantly, what's not there. There's a reason why. All right, so how long is our break? Is it a 10-minute break?
Is it 10 minutes?
All right, we're back on at 10:30. I'll see you then.
Okay. 10 minutes. I'll put.
We're back from the break. To summarize last session here, two things, two concepts here. Number one, and this speaks to one of the things that Tawanda said and Jackie said. Don't complain about the results that you didn't get from the work that you didn't do. Let me say that again. In an organizational sense, don't complain about the results that you didn't get from the work you didn't do. Which means you got to ask, you got to find, you got to act, and you got to be willing to do staff development for those that aren't performing. But if you don't, you can't sit and complain and whine and blame others if you didn't do the work. If you're not willing to let people go who don't add anything to the organization, if you're to cap your costs, if you're not willing to do the things that would attract students in terms of evening and weekend activities, if you're not willing to do those things, then don't complain about the results that you didn't get. Now, but what we do to hide and cover that is what I refer to as UCP. That's, of all these pearls of wisdom today, that's the one you need to write down. UCP. Usual customary practice. We hide behind usual customary practice. And what your clue to that is we doing the right things, we just aren't getting the right results. That's the number one thing you'll hear as a consultant. We're doing the right things. I don't know why we aren't getting the results. If you were doing the right things, you'd get the right results. That you aren't getting the results tells you what? Data analysis, when you aren't getting what you wanted or need to get, you aren't doing the right things. You're doing the usual customary things that have always been done. So you've got to collect your data, know what it means, know what to collect, how to analyze it. All these other concepts kind of fall in line under that. So you have to have an assessment. You have to be able to measure. You have to make decisions. You can't base evaluation on whether you like people or not. I was telling my doctoral EDCI group the other night, that's curriculum instruction people. They're all smart. But I told them, until you can let good people go that can't teach, you can't affect outcomes in school. Because our job is not to employ good people or provide good people jobs. Our job is performance. And what I hear all the time in the school business is well, she's good, bad, this person's a good person or likable, agreeable. They show up on time, they're sober and clean clothes every day, but if you can't teach, that's our core competence. Until you can let good people go that just aren't good teachers. But we hide behind, well, we've always done it this way. We hide behind that, or we hide behind process variables. Now, what's the difference between an outcome variable and a process variable. An outcome variable is what you actually want. In our example this morning, Gardner Webb, the outcome is how many of them actually enroll and send us a check. That's the outcome variable. What's the process variable? The number of applicants that we get. Now, we changed from a single application system a couple years back to the multifunctional application system. So now students can go into a website, download and fill out a common application, and they can send it up to 5 schools for free. Common application. It's online. It's really easy. And so when we went from single application, you had to pull down Gardner Webb's individual one. If you wanted to apply to Gardner Webb, you had to fill out another application to Gardner Webb. So when we went to the multiple application system where they just select the colleges they want to send it to, our number of applications doubled. We went from 1,500 to 3,000. And so the first thing that we heard the admissions and recruitment people crowing about is, you know, record numbers. Record numbers. Look at us. Record numbers. That's got nothing to do with how many are going to come. That's a process. That's a process variable. That's not an outcome. Let's wait and see how many come. And guess what happened in the fall of 19? The same 400 showed up, and they were just stunned. They couldn't figure it out. You assessed or did an evaluation based on a process variable, not an outcome variable. You deluded yourself. You fooled yourself. You got to know what's important and then set about measuring that. And you can't get, you know, and the biggest challenge you're going to face is the consultant people are going to tell you, we're doing the right thing. We don't know why we're not getting the outcome we desire. Because you're not evaluating people and performance, and in lieu of actual performance outcomes, you know, which are outcome variables, we use things along the way, like the number of applications, or did you show up to work and work so many hours? And so the only metric that I know of for undergraduate faculty at Gardner Webb is you must do 10-hour office hours a week. Now, let me say that again. The only measurable thing that we have at Gardner Webb for undergraduate faculty is they must physically show up to their office 10 hours a week. Is that an outcome variable? That's a process variable. So for 2 years, I was in a different building. I was not in Craig Hall. I was in Lindsay for 2 years. Donald probably didn't even know that. That was back when I first moved from Charlotte campus to the main campus. I was in Lindsay for 2 years, and there was a professor who had no students. His discipline has no students, has no majors. But he complained every chance he got at every faculty meeting about he wanted to be able to do his office hours remotely or from home, because he said, and I quote, "No students ever come to see me." Well, that ought to be in your first clue. If no students ever come see him and he's there, he's not adding any value to your organization. If no students ever come to see him and he doesn't have any, he wanted to do his hours remotely. Well, no, you got to come physically to the campus. So what did he do for those 10 hours every week that he sat in his office? I can't make this up. He sat and cut out cartoons and put them on his door as a form of social protest. I'm not making this up. He sat and cut out cartoons and physically cut cartoons out and posted them on his door. And every week he'd have a new set of cartoons. He did that as a form of social protest. But the bigger issue there is because you show up 10 hours a week, you punch a time clock. Has nothing to do with performance. Again, That's just a process variable. You'll get a lot of that as a consultant. They'll give you a lot of data that doesn't have anything to do with what you're, with success or failure or what you're trying to measure. You've got to be able to wade through all that stuff and get down to the kernel of truth that they're usually trying to hide or protect, because it's people that they're trying to hide or protect. One of our case studies this semester, when we get toward the end, when we get to it's kind of hidden in that case study, is we're working with Jasmine. I don't know if you've read that far along yet, and Jasmine, we're trying to help her with a plan. But what we look at, and I have to ask is why in the world are we employing Jasmine? That's not the point of the case study, but to me, that's the overarching theory. Is Jasmine is running a team of 10 or 12 people in a customer service division of an organization. Why in the world are we employing Jasmine? That's the bigger issue. Jasmine has no dispositional skills that would lead you to believe in any stretch of the imagination that you ought to let her around anybody, much less be in customer service. But again, we're a master at hiding things that we don't want people to know. Our second case study that we're going to do, they've used the quantitative survey to hide the real, but the qualitative tells us the truth. If you'll look at our second case study, the data doesn't match. We've got our quantitative data that says one thing, and we have our qualitative that says something different. They don't match. You have to start asking yourselves why. And then we look, oh, wait a minute, they've manipulated the instrument on the quantitative so that it doesn't look too bad. We can discount what people say and what they feel. He just don't like me, this, that, the other. But to make sure that we mask the real issue there, or we hide the real issue, we have manipulated the instrument. We have basically invalidated the instrument in order to get results that don't look bad. You'll get a lot of that as well. They'll take like I've got a student who's doing Denison right now. And Denison has a format of, you've seen it, it's in quadrants of 12 questions, all 48. And she said to me, do I need all 48 of these? And I said, absolutely. She said, why? I said, if you take any of them out, you invalidate the instrument. It's only valid if we use all 48 because it has matching, it does split half and it matches and have quadrants. I said, if you just pick and choose the 20 questions you want, that's not a valid instrument. You have invalidated that instrument. That's a lot of what organizations will do, so that you don't, that you don't actually get to who's doing what or not doing what in the organization. And so I am trying, this may sound crass or crude, I'm not teaching you to cheat. I'm teaching you how to catch the cheaters. My assumption is that you will be ethical people, and that's why we're doing the IRB. We have a deal with Gardner Webb that you don't have to do the actual IRB application process and go through the grad school. That if you take and do the IRB that we have and get your certificate, that's all that matters. But that's what IRB is the ethics of this. Most of the people you're going to go out and work with are good people, but to them, ethics is just something in the dictionary. I'm going to teach you all the tricks of the trade, hopefully, or most of them, but not so that you can use your powers for evil, but that you can use your powers for good. That's the whole notion here. So let's get back to our list of terms, which is the basis of today's rant, of course. So we've talked about qualitative and quantitative. We understand what that are. Descriptive statistics, describe like mean, median, and mode. Also levels of measurement, nominal, interval, ordinal, and ratio. Nominal, yes, no, male, female. Interval, how far between the groups or the people. Ratio, And so one of my favorite stories is golf about, I'm quite sure that even if you're not a golfer or don't know much about golf, you know who Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson are. They're respectively 50 and 45 years old now, so they're not so much relevant in today's golf. Tiger a little more than Phil, but there was a time when they were number 1 and number 2 in the world rankings. That's back when Tiger was winning everything, but they were number 1 and number 2. And in order to make viewing compelling, especially the weeks that Tiger wasn't playing and Phil was this notion of this competition for the world number 1 ranking in golf. And so Tiger was 1 and Phil was 2. And so every week, especially if Tiger was playing, everybody was watching. But if Tiger wasn't playing, they had to figure out a way to get people to watch TV with golf on. So it was, will Phil overtake Tiger this week? Because Tiger's not playing. Tiger was 1, Phil was 2. That implies that they're, and that's ordinal. 1, 2, 3, 4. That implies that they're close. What should have been reported was interval. If they had reported interval, Tiger, Phil was number 2. He had 150,000 points. And right behind him was maybe Ernie Els with 145,000 and Azinger with maybe 135,000. That's like 2, 3, and 4, fairly close dispersion. Tiger was number 1. He had over 3 million points. As it came to pass, unfortunately, after his former wife took the 9-iron to him, he did not play a tournament for over 3 years and still kept the number 1 ranking. That's how far ahead he was in the points race. But we wouldn't tell that on TV because it didn't fit our narrative. We needed to find a way to get people to watch golf on TV the weeks that Tiger wasn't playing. And so we contrived by misleading the public by using ordinal data, 1, 2, 3, 4, rather than interval data, which would have shown that Tiger had 3 million points and they had 150,000 points. That, barring the 9-iron incident with the wife and not playing for over 3 years, there was no way that anybody could ever overtake Tiger. Well, that doesn't compel anybody to watch a bunch of people who aren't Tiger play golf. That's, again, that's descriptive statistics. That's levels of measurement. Inferential statistics, we take population and sample, and we do variance and we do correlation, and we infer things about the bigger population from the smaller sample size that we pull from them. We can't talk to all 1,000 people. We can't survey. They all won't tell us. We pull a population out and we generalize what we find from that sample back to that bigger population. But again, as I said earlier, you got rules. If you want to talk about men and women, then you need to pull you're going to sample out of that population. You need to pull out equal. That's stratified. Can't use convenience, just like Gardner Webb. You can't ask kids who came why the other ones that didn't come, why they didn't come. And then usually, but we know that intellectually, but we also know if we ask them, they'll tell us. The kids who came won't know those things. That won't matter to them because they came. So we can ask them, and they can come up with stuff and that looks good, and we can go out and maybe do that. But if we ask the ones who didn't come, they're going to tell us cost, location, rankings, rigor, quality, and we don't want that we stop preaching and now we meddling and we start doing those things. That means we got to let people go that don't have students. We got to let people go who can't teach. It means that we got to hold people accountable that are in student success and all these other things that aren't running any programs to keep kids. again, it goes back to a patronage organization. We know that if we ask, they'll tell us. And we know we're not going to like the answer. Action research is what you're doing. You're going to be collecting data in a real organization. That's all action means. It's real. Scientific method means that we're going to do validity and reliability. We're going to have we're going to actually observe the rules of qualitative and quantitative. We're going to use validated instruments that measure what they say they measure. That's all validity is this measures what we said it measures. Now, I'm wearing a wristwatch today. It is a valid, because it's a good enough wristwatch, it's a valid measure of time. Thankfully, for the watch's sake, it is not a measure of weight. You know, if I step on the watch, it won't tell me how much of what I weigh, it'll just break. So it's only valid for the intended measure, which is time. But it does measure time, you know, accurately enough. It is a good enough timepiece that it measures it accurately enough. So the question then becomes, we understand the big picture that a watch measures time and not weight. The issue is it good enough? What about if it were a $12 West Bend, or, you know, something like that? Is that a valid measure? It looks like it. It keeps time, but does it keep it accurate enough to be valid? We have parameters, you know. It has to be able to keep, what is it? It can only lose, what, 1 second a month, or gain 1 second a month. That's the parameters for a valid or a certified timepiece. Does a $12 watch meet that? I wore Timexes for years that lost 5 minutes a week, which was aggravating to me because, you know, so what did I have to make sure that I do every time I set that watch? I had to set it 5 minutes ahead for, you know, for all those years. So I finally figured out, you know, I ought to spend a little bit more money and buy a decent watch that actually is a valid timepiece, so that I could keep it right on the actual time that it is, which, you know, the actual time that it is, is 10:53, and guess what? My watch is on 10:53. You know, it never dawned on me that maybe I ought to buy a better watch and I wouldn't have to keep setting it 5 minutes ahead every week, so that by the end of the week I wouldn't be late. So my point on that is validity is there's certain measures, there's certain things. So we have different types. We have face validity, construct validity, content validity. You can read about that in our book. But again, validity is, does it measure what it intends to measure? But there are parameters on that as well. We call those confidence intervals. It has to do it well. It can't just measure time. It must measure it well. Reliability is does it work the same from Murphy to Manio? The biggest issue is like test administration in a testing center. When y'all took the GRE or the MAT in schools, when you give standard, do we use it so that it gets the same results everywhere? Do we administer this instrument the same way every time? Now, one of the big things in the world nowadays is for parents to, you know, the latest way for them to show they're behind is to go and yell and scream at school people until they give their kid a 504 plan. Why would they do that? Why would you go to a school and scream and yell that your kid is 504, has a learning, you know, has something wrong with them? Why would you do that? It's all about testing. If you get an accommodation, 504 accommodation plan, what do they do on, you know, to make tests reliable, that each section is timed, right? You get 60 minutes for this section. When you get an accommodation plan, what does that do? You get more time. See, it's just like when students turn in work to me, they say, can I do that over again? I can do better. Nope. Because we're measuring the amount of time is a factor in the quality of work as well. We could all do better if we had more time. You know, when we divide up and do tasks in a licensure program, and all of our this is the only non-licensure program in the school of DEOL. This is a liberal arts program. And all of our licensure programs, we have specific things that DPI requires us to have our students to do. Task stream portfolio, Don knows what that is. But it's all timed. They get a certain amount of time to do those tasks. And so for a comparative basis, to compare my work to Tawanda's work, for that results to be reliable, we both had have the same amount of time to do the work. If we give me twice as long as we give Tawanda, we would expect me to do much better work than Tawanda. So I have to explain to students all the time, this is the amount of time. We grade you not only on the quality of your work, but it's got to be in these parameters. That if we give you an extra week, yeah, yours will be better, but that invalidates your results. We're not allowed to do that. So what parents seek to do now in public schools is to put their thumb on the scale and go get their kid more time. So their answers reflect 90 minutes of time to do the test rather than everybody else's 60, to give them an advantage on the test. That's what reliability is. We all had the same set of rules, that we all did it in the same amount of time. You go take the bar exam, they don't let you take it home. They don't let you have 2 days. You get 8 hours. That's it. What was it? Somebody sued. I didn't watch it, but supposedly one of those Real Housewives shows, they had a son who they had gotten him an accommodation plan in school so that he had advantages all the way through, and then they got mad because when he took the LSAT to get into law school, they wouldn't give him extra time. You know, and they sued, and of course they lost. But yeah, because his mama had gotten the extra time on test his whole career, they thought when he went and took the LSAT to get into law school that he should get extra time to take it. No, it's a comparative basis. If we're going to compare apples to apples, everybody gets the same amount of time. The rules and conditions and the guidelines have to be the same. That's what reliability speaks to. Validity speaks to the actual instrument. Reliable speaks to the conditions around the administration of that. And so there's other concepts that work off of that. So those are the two. That's kind of the basis of data collection. Is it reliable? Was everything on an equal footing? Did we implement with fidelity how it was supposed to be implemented? And did that actual assessment or test or measure or survey, did it measure what we intended for it to measure? If we intended to measure time, that watch, did it measure time accurate? That's validity. So you can't get away from those two concepts. That's the heart of all data analysis, population sample, making sure that we haven't manipulated that so we get the right people to work with to begin with. And then validity and reliability says that we worked with them or collected the data from them the right way. If you got those two, all the rest is just details. All right, validity, reliability. All right, the enemy of scientific method, validity and reliability is anecdotal, what we call expertise. Who knows what sabermetrics are? Sabermetrics. Sabermetrics is the study of analytics in baseball. The movie that came out of that was called Moneyball. Anybody ever see the movie Moneyball? It was a really popular movie, did well, because it starred Brad Pitt. He played Billy Bean, who was executive with the Oakland Athletics professional baseball team. And he hired a saber mathematician to look at numbers. And if you've read ahead, and as you were supposed to, and read Super Crunchers by Ian Ayers, the bean counters, the number crunchers beat the experts every time. In baseball forever, who made it to the big leagues was based on scouts who went and watched them play. Now, when you get there, it's based on numbers. Either you can hit or pitch, and hitters are evaluated on the basis of their batting average, how many times that they get a hit versus how many times they go to the plate, number of home runs, runs driven in. Those are the kinds of things that baseball players, hitters were evaluated on forever. Batting average, home runs, and the runs knocked in. But they came up with all kind of new things like, whip and slugging percentage, all these other kinds of things that along the way to the major leagues that gave a better predictor of your success at major league. Billy Bean, they ran those numbers on all these free agents, these guys that were cheap, and they got all these guys in and they won ball games with the lowest payroll in the league because they used actual metrics. They used statistics to figure out who would be able to play and win ball games rather than relying on scouts. Because scouting is just anecdotal. It's just things that you've observed. It's your opinion. There's no real data behind it. Anecdotal is that goes back to usual customary practices. We know we're doing the right things because we've always done these. That's just anecdotal. You don't measure whether they work or not. My example is me and Buku. Me and Buku, I take Buku up on the roof at Craig Hall at Gardner Webb. It's a 2-story building. I give Buku a gallon jug of water, make him drink it, and I throw him off the roof. He hits the ground. I go down and I pick Buku up and I dust him off. He's a little worse for wear, but I dust him off and I take him back up on the roof and I make him drink 2 gallons of water. And I throw him off the roof again and tell him to fly. Well, there's several high-level concepts in that scenario. The first is double loop learning from Dr. Ardress at Harvard. We commonly, what is commonly known in layman's term of double loop learning is the theory of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I keep on making Buku drink water and thinking that's going to make him fly when there's no correlation between water and flying. That's Ardress's double loop theory. I know you had that in 730 and 732. They talked about single loop and double loop learning. Double loop learning is that you get data and feedback and you see if there is a correlation. You actually measure that. Now, where I came up with this notion to make Buku drink water to see if he could fly, I watched birds. And what does every bird do? Every bird drinks water. And guess what every bird can do? They can fly. That's anecdotal. There's no correlation between drinking water and flying, but because I've seen every bird I've ever seen drink water and every bird fly, I put 2 and 2 together and came up with 22. That's anecdotal on observation. I didn't understand the underlying theories behind it. That is what you are going to battle as a consultant more than anything else is we've never done it that way, or we've always done it this way, usual customary practices. That won't work. Why? Because we've never done it. Well, you're doing this and it's not working. Anecdotal is just through observation. There's no data. There's no, how you collected it wasn't reliable. How you measured it wasn't valid. You just thought it. You just saw it. On your opinion, I've got 30 years of experience. That's how I know this works. Well, that has nothing to do with validity and reliability. That's just anecdotal. We now have the scouting combine for the NFL. that's when players who've been out of high school 3 years are invited to. That means they're, they could have graduated from college, they could have played out their eligibility, but they got to be 3 years out of high school. They get invited to a combine in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Field every spring. And what do? They have them run and jump, do all kind of drills for their position, and they measure them. Why do they do that? They've got all this game film on them. They've got all these recommendations from their coaches. They've got advanced scouting departments that go and watch them, and they do all those kinds of. Why do they hold this combine? Because it's reliable. It puts everybody under a certain set of circumstances. If you throw for 4,000 yards a year in certain leagues, like the SEC or maybe even the Big Ten, then you're a really good quarterback. If you throw for 4,000, what is that? The league that A&M and all them are in, that just try to outscore one another, and the quarterbacks throw for 6,000 or 8,000 yards a year. And the games look like basketball scores, 65 to 59. How do you compare that to a league where they play defense? How do you know how good that quarterback is? Well, you set up a situation with valid tests that's reliable, that everybody goes, and guess what they do? First thing you do, you step on the scale. Then they measure you. And then they time you how fast you are. Then they measure how high you can jump. And that gives everybody a comparative basis. Watching game film is you don't know how good the team was, or the fellow in front of the guy that he got 3 sacks that game. But who was the tackle that he had to go through to get to the quarterback? He might not have been very good. Yeah, the quarterback threw for 4,000 yards, but you're in a league where the average is 6,000. How good is that? Average, the mean. Again, we apply these statistical concepts. And so what has happened is we don't have nearly as many players wash out of the NFL that aren't any good anymore. But then we do things like Johnny Manziel. He goes to the combine and he's exposed as an imposter, but he gets drafted anyway. Why would we do something that dumb? Usual, customary practice. This is the way we've always done it. It was apparent as soon as he hit the league, he was too short, he was too small, he was too slow. As we used to say in football all the time, he's small, but he is slow. He didn't have the arm strength. They measure that. He in no way could be a professional football player. That's exactly what the data from the combine showed. But we had people, Cleveland, who said, we don't care about that. Our eye test, our anecdotal, says he's going to be the next big thing. But he was playing in the little boy league, in a league where they didn't play any defense. I got so tickled. That was the same year that Jadeveon Clowney from South Carolina came out. Now, remembering that Jadeveon is a lifetime talent. He's just a freak of physical freak of nature. But what they did is they did a graph. Basically, it was a bar chart. It was the 40-yard dash, and they had them on video running the 40-yard dash. Understanding that Manziel was a quarterback, small, and weighed a little less than 200 pounds. Jadeveon Clowney is a defensive lineman, weighed 275. 6'6", 275, ridiculously sized human being. He ran like a 4.5 40, which is unheard of. Manziel run like a 5.1 40, at 75 pounds less in weight. And they showed this and said, now this is the guy that's going to be chasing this guy. How's this going to turn out? And in a 40-yard dash, Clowney, at the end, when he had done 40 yards, Manziel had only run 28 yards in the same amount of time. And they said, this is not going to end well. The fellows chasing him are much faster than him. He's supposed to be faster than the guys chasing him, but he's not. So what happened? He was injured. What little he got to play was terrible, but, you know, they killed him, and he was out of the league. He was so beat up and injured after part of one season. But the guys, the anecdotal people said, oh, we saw what he did at A&M. He can play. He went to the everybody said, wait a minute now. He went to the combine, and his numbers were at the bottom of the class. He came in last against every other quarterback in every measurable category. He was dead last. But scouts talked Cleveland into drafting him. Therein lies your problem in most organizations. Patronage organizations, this person, their metrics, terrible. But because they're, you know, somebody's brother-in-law or cousin, we hire them anyway. And then we have to cover up by having no performance metrics or putting our thumb on the scale, giving them extra time, reliability, or manipulating the test we give them, validity. And that's why we fail as organizations. We allow the experts to enter anecdotal information in that's not valid, not reliable, is simply their opinion, which can be shaded by certain other variables, certain other things. He's a good guy. I know his parents. The college admission scandal. Everybody knows that one. Perfect example of what we've been talking about this. Most of those students, they'd given them extra time, but they couldn't give them extra time on the tests that matter, the SAT and some other things. And so they manipulated the process to get the outcome that was desired. They couldn't perform. And so when people can't perform, it puts stress on the organization to do one of two things. Either let them go or manipulate the process. In a professional organization, what do? We let them go. In a patronage organization, what do? We manipulate the process. You've got to figure that out when you get to your partnering organization. You've got to figure out which they are. Otherwise, you know, you're going to get lit on fire. You're going to kick over their long anthill, whatever analogy, whatever metaphor you want to use. You've got to know what kind of organization this is. Do they prize performance? Are they professional? Do outcomes matter? Or do people matter? When I say people matter, I don't mean treating people right. Do keeping certain people employed matter? I'm not asking you to adopt their ethical, but I'm asking you not to compromise yours. That's what the IRB is all about, is you not compromising your principles, you not compromising your ethical behavior. Goodness of fit, that simply makes sure that you use the appropriate measure that's appropriate to measure the outcome that you're trying to get. That's what I talked about this morning when Gardner Webb was trying to use data from a convenient sample of students who had come to look at why people didn't come. There was not a goodness of fit there in the methodology that they were trying. Make sure you use the instruments and use the processes that get you what you want. There's some other, it's also, the difference between what's the real and the ideal. But for us, it's do we employ the correct measures to give us the data that we need? Gap analysis, is the difference between the real and the ideal. You know, where you should be and where you are. You got to be honest with yourself. You get a lot of number thumping here. You get a lot of people that, you know, again, that report outcome, but, you know, don't report outcome variables. They report process variables to make things look better than they are and to make the gap look smaller than it is. Ethical conduct. All right. We've already covered mean, median, and mode. All right. So here are the next two big things, and these may be the biggest things that we'll talk about today. The difference between significance and meaningful. Significant does not, in a statistical sense. Now, this is going to be said. You said a lot of stupid things this morning. This is the stupidest one you've said so far. Significant does not mean significant. I can't help it. I'm sorry, but that's the easiest way to explain it. Significant does not mean significant. Significant means it speaks to the amount of error in your technique. It doesn't speak to your findings at all and how important or significant they are. People make the mistake of thinking significant when they say that, you know, this is significant at the 0.5 level. You know, the significant finding from this drug, you know, from using this eugenics or whatever. Significant speaks to your technique. Did you make error or not? Did you use a convenient sample? Did you use a random sample when you should have used a random stratified sample? Speaks to reliability. Did you give more time than you were supposed to give on this test? All significant means is we there's only a 5% chance or less that there's an error in these findings, that this is actually what is real. In social sciences, we do a 5% margin of error. In medical and evidence-based medicine, it's 1%. It's 0.01. But for our purposes, when we report significance, when we run a statistical analysis in quantitative analysis, if we do a t-test, you know, before and after, you know, we measure kids before, we teach them which is the treatment, then we measure them afterwards. Simple t-test or analysis of variance, we report the significance level as p equals 0.5 or is less than 0.5. That means that we believe that there's less than a 5% chance that we made an error in our calculations with our instrument, in our reliability. Doesn't say a darn thing about what we found. It only speaks to our technique. But that's the most commonly misinterpreted thing in our society about statistics. I see it all the time. This is significant. And people think that means important, meaningful. Just speaks to your technique, period. You can't take it any further than that. P equals 0.5. That means that 5% or less chance of error in our calculations, in our technique, in our sampling, with our instrument. That's all it speaks to, period. End of that story. You say, but Dale, what about our findings? That's what we really wanted to know about, was what did we find? That's meaningful. What we're interested in is finding meaningful differences, not statistical, meaningful. In general, that's the beta column of an analysis of variance, or when you're looking at correlation goes from -1 to -1. The strength of correlation is the number, not the negative or positive. So a -9 is stronger than a +6. That was one of your questions. You can have inverse relationships or correlations. All that means is the more of one thing, the less of another thing. The more exercise, the less weight. You know, and that leads me to that analogy. I can lose weight one of two ways. I can work out and eat better, or I can reach down and turn the wheel on the front of the scale. And see, that's what we're talking about here, is manipulating the process. And so what we're interested in is significance says that we didn't manipulate the process. Now we're past that. Nobody turned the wheel on the front of the scale. Now we're looking at how much do I actually weigh on that scale. That's what's meaningful, not stepping on the scale and getting, it's what that tells me when I get that number. That's what's meaningful about being weighed. As long as I'm sure somebody hadn't turned the wheel on the front of the scale, I'm good. Now, the important thing about weighing me is how much do you weigh? The actual, that's what's meaningful. Not that I stepped on the scale, other than I could have broke it as big as I am. But that's what, so think of the scale analogy. Significant is nobody's turned the wheel on the scale. The scale is, we've not manipulated the scale on the scale. The other piece, the meaningful, is how much did you weigh when you stepped on that scale? What does that tell us about your health, your diet, all those associated pieces? So meaningful is what we want to know. And in general, this is just in general, if there's not at least a 0.6 or a -6 correlation, then your findings aren't meaningful. That means they're within one standard deviation of the mean. We know standard deviation is the average distance from the mean. So what that means is if you're buying a program, if you're involved in something and it doesn't yield at least one standard deviation of gain, it's not worth the money. That's what it means. It's not meaningful. You don't get bang for the buck. Let's say Buku School decides to buy a new reading program. Cost $1 million. Test scores went up 1 point. Was it worth $1 million? That's not meaningful enough. Now, that the findings were significant. We're sure they went up 1 point. That's all it tells us. We're sure they went up 1 point. So what the company that sold that reading program to Buku would say, you got a significant difference here. That just simply means we're sure that they actually gained 1 point. But meaningful is we paid $1 million and went up 1 point. 5 points is one standard deviation. That's a fifth of one standard deviation. That's not hardly worth $1 million, is it? Of course not. Those are the things that's the difference between meaningful and significant. And unscrupulous people will manipulate those two things. Now, they'll be telling you the truth, but they will let you infer, they will imply and let you infer something that's not there. They will overstate their case by talking about significance when all it speaks to is the actual process, not the outcome that you're interested in. Again, it's a process variable, not an outcome variable. Significance is process. Meaningful is outcome. And that's what we're interested in. As consultants, we're interested in the bottom line. We're interested in performance. And if we aren't, we won't stay in business if we aren't. All right. How much time we got in this segment?
Let's see. For our case studies.
Okay.
Or whatever the next agenda on the agenda.
Let's see. Let's look at this. I keep pulling that one up, and I mean to pull this one up. All right. So we're going to 12, so we've got some time here. Good. I dive into this next thing. All right. We've talked about population and sample. Now, let's talk about error, skill, content, process, luck. All that kind of goes together in one notion here. Test scores, and that means, again, quantitative data, something that has a right answer. And it doesn't have to be like a test in school, but a test implies that there is a right answer. And even, so when we measure a certain body of knowledge that somebody knows, or outcomes that they're expected. Basically, that test score is a function of skill and luck. Luck does play a part. Skill has two parts: content and process. Your skill in any particular area depends on how much you know, like mathematics, and your knowledge of how to take a mathematics test. That's process. So when kids go take an SAT course, prep, they don't teach them more math. They don't teach them more physics or chemistry. They teach them how to manipulate the test. You know, eliminate the, and guess, that part of it. That's part of that, is how to take the test better. Now, those gains will be short-lived. We call that statistical phenomenon regression to the mean. That scores that are artificially inflated by just manipulating the process will regress back down to where they should have been all along. Now, if you want kids to know more, you have to teach them more. And that means, or anybody in any organization that speaks to staff development, as we talked about earlier today, you have to give them more content. They have to know more math. They have to know more about their job. They have to know more content in order for gains to be sustained. Just like in schools, we can't just give them practice tests all the time. We got to actually teach, more content. So how well somebody in an organization, or how well an organization does, is how well do they know their business, their job, what they do. How well do you know how to teach? I can teach you some tricks, but in the end, you've got to know your business. You've got to know your job. You've got to know what you do. A math student has to know math. I mean, teaching them how to manipulate the test only lasts so much. How to guess better, you get four, on multiple choice, you got four potential answers. Eliminate, one or two that can't be it, and then guess. And that's where the luck part comes in. There is a luck part of guessing. So, back in the old days, and even today, when we retest graduate students on the GRE, or let them take them the next time around, or the MAT, or we let kids take the next administration of the SAT, or we let kids 2 days later that failed the EOG or the EOC in schools, when we let them retake the test without reteaching, what are we dependent upon them to do to get a higher score? Which of these concepts have I just outlined? Content, process, or luck? When we retest without reteaching, what are we hoping is going to happen for them? Are we hoping they're going to know more math? No. Are we hoping that they're going to know how to take the test better? No. What are we hoping for?
Luck.
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 That they're going to be better guessers this time around. That's what we're doing. Because it does factor in. So I'll speak more to that. So the thing is, in organizations, you got to try to eliminate as much luck as possible. You've got to get your situations where you're measuring outcomes, and you're measuring things that is not just dependent upon a guess or luck. That you have deliverables that you can measure that aren't based on a guess or on luck. You got to get away from that. So back in the old days, the pass-fail line for kids was 70. And so what we would do is, as soon as the day after we got the test results from kids in public school, all the kids that scored 65 to 69, what would we do with them the next day? They failed the test yesterday. We test them the next day. All the kids that scored 65 to 69. We knew they didn't know any more math today than they did yesterday when they took the test and failed. We gave them the opportunity to be lucky, to guess a little bit better, see if we could get them over 70, because we were concerned about our pass rate for our school. Why is that? Why is that not reliable? Why does that invalidate your school-wide score?
Well, some of the arguments that we have heard is the external variable. Probably at that particular time, the student has ADD and he wasn't on his medication, or
No, but I know.
no.
Yeah, I know, but they're saying, well, but that's what why we're gonna let him test it. Look at it from a bigger picture here.
We're not really looking at, we can't really assess what students actually learn, because if we're retesting them the day after, it's just
Look,
they're guessing. It's just luck. Yeah.
it's just luck. But
Yeah.
here's the reason
Yeah.
why it's invalid, why it's not reliable. What didn't we do to the kids that scored 70 through 74?
The first.
We didn't give them the chance to be unlucky. We gave the kids that were up to 5 points below the cutoff, we gave them a chance to be lucky. We didn't give the kids that scored up to 5 points above the chance to be unlucky. So here's what would happen. And we've done this, by the way. You got 100 kids. You got 50 that scored up to 5 points above the cutoff, and you got 50 that scored below. If you retest, you'll still have 50 and 50, except the members of the groups will change. Statistically, randomization tells us that the numbers will come out the same again, but now it'll change who went across that line will change. But if we give kids the chance to be lucky, we also have to give kids the chance to be unlucky. That's for reliability. They're taking a valid test, but we're not treating everybody the same.
So you're saying that in that scenario, to retest the entire population?
No, just those that scored. You didn't test everybody that failed the test. If you remember back in the old days of that, they only did that for a short period of time until people like me said, wait a minute, hey, mister, wait a minute. They only tested kids that had what they said a chance to pass. Those that were up to 5 points below the cutoff that failed by 65 to 69, they retested them. And now there was no way they learned anymore. They had it the next day. They were giving them a chance to be lucky.
Yeah.
But the reason why that invalidates those scores is for reliability. Everybody wasn't treated the same. They didn't give the kids that barely passed the chance to get unlucky and fail. Now, if in order to validate those scores, we'd have to test everybody 5 above and 5 below. 5, that scored up.
And that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm going to. 5 below and 5.
To do both. Now, if you did that, but the problem with that is what are you going to tell those parents whose kids passed the first time, but now when you tested him again, he passed. Why'd you test him again? Well, in order to make it, in order to not have error for it to be statistically significant, we have to test both sides, the positive and the negative. Students have been given the opportunity. The students who scored a level 1 on the EOG did not take the test, but level 2 students retook the test, and then some of them dropped back down to level 1. Yeah, and then you had to explain that. But what the whole point was to try to manipulate the process to make our schools look better than it really was. And because we know that luck is a part of, you've got skill and luck. That's a part of it. We couldn't give them any more skill in one day. We were dependent upon luck. The whole point for organizations is you got to try to control for luck. You got to take luck out of the equation. if you want to find what's really real, you can't give people the opportunity just to be lucky. We're not looking for luck because luck runs out. It's called regression to the mean. It is a statistical concept. Luck runs out. That's what Las Vegas is built on. Do you think you go out there and win every time? They've got all the house odds set in their favor. They know with enough that you might get lucky, but eventually the numbers balance themselves back out. They've set the winning percentage in Vegas at 70-30. They win 70% of the time. You win 30% of the time. If you stay long enough, you lose your house. They know you have a little lucky streak, but if they can keep you coming back, your luck will eventually run out. That's just the way numbers work. It's called regression to the mean. What we have to make sure is that we don't base organizational decisions on luck, because luck runs out. We just got lucky. We don't know why we got this happened right now, but we can't make plans. As I say, you can't obligate yourself for on-time payments on things that are just one-off anomalies. This month we got 15 new clients this month. We can't assume we don't know how we got them. It's just luck. Can we depend on getting 15 new ones next time? No. If we don't know how we got them, we don't know we don't know if they'll come back ever again. Too many organizations, operate on hope. Hope is not a plan. And that's what when you walk into your consultancies, a lot of them operate on hope. They don't know why things work the way they did. They depend on getting lucky, something happening. Their metrics are based on luck, not on skill. And you have to explain to them that if you don't know how this happened, the only explanation is luck. They don't want to hear that. They want to think that, that there's something inherently better and smarter and gooder about them, when it's just simply luck. But guess what? Everybody's luck eventually runs out. And if you don't base your organization on skill and measurement and performance and being honest with yourself, you will eventually go out of business. As we have learned in the first part of this century, there's no such thing as organizations too big to fail. The classic example is Enron, E-N-R-O-N. If you don't know the story of Enron, it's a book and a movie called The Smartest Guys in the Room. It was a big energy company in Texas. And they said, we're too big to fail, but they said debt doesn't matter. As long as we have assets more than what we owe, debt doesn't matter. And so they had incredible debt. And they said, the old rules of accounting don't matter. Look at us, we've got this debt. But they didn't understand how incredibly lucky they were in the economy they were in. And as soon as the economy changed, what happened? They ended up in prison. They'd been stealing the money and running up debt, and some of them, and one killed himself. But in the name of the movie is The Smartest Guys in the Room. They took a set of conditions, of variables that was just basically luck, and claimed that they were the smartest guys in the room, that they had found a new way of accounting and a whole new series of business practices that nobody had ever seen before in the history of the world, that defied common mathematics and rules of accounting. Y'all just don't know. Their success initially was simply based on luck, the right economic climate with the right people in charge of making decisions. But like everybody else, their luck ran out, and when they weren't using sound mathematical concepts and accounting principles, they crashed and burned. They were the biggest energy company in the United States, and they went out of business because their success was based on luck. So it's not just little organizations that there are some big ones that don't understand the difference between skill and luck. Those are the people who operate on anecdotal rather than looking at their data. They operate anecdotally. They saw a bird drink water. They think drinking water makes you fly. They're smarter. They're the first person to ever see that. They're just that much smarter than the rest of us. Numbers don't lie, folks. So you've got to make sure that when you go into your consultancy, that you take everything they tell you with a grain of salt. Because it won't be that they're intentionally lying to you. A lot of people believe this stuff. They believe that their years of expertise makes them an expert, or their years of experience makes them an expert. Not necessarily so. The numbers always beat the experts in every discipline, in every organization. The numbers guys, they're always right. In the end, the anecdotal people, it's just luck. And then everybody's luck runs out. So that's a big concept for us as consultants. All right, T-test, you know what that is. That's a before and after. We do a pre-test, or we take last year's test. We do this year's, we give them the treatment, whatever the treatment is, whatever we do to them, and then we measure them at the end. Analysis of variance looks at multiple groups to see how much variance can be attributed to independent variables. In that scenario, you have the dependent variable, which is whatever your outcome is, and then you have the independent variables, like in EVOS, it's father's, race, father's income, mother's education, teacher school. All those are independent variables, and each of those contributes to a certain percentage variance to that test score. That's what analysis of variance seeks to do. A linear regression just puts all those variables together. A frequency distribution simply is a distribution of the responses to a survey. Frequency distribution, remember, when we do survey means the difference between a survey and a test is a survey, there is not a right answer. It's people's opinion. Now, we know that if enough people answer that is technically the right answer. But we can't do analysis of variance or a lot of t-tests and that stuff. We can simply report using descriptive statistics the frequency that this group answered A, and we can do a mean, median, and mode on that and standard deviations. But remembering, when we have data that is collected from a survey of people's opinion, and it's if we have a math test and we ask 2 + 2 and answer A is 4, that's the right answer. But when we ask a question about somebody's effectiveness or what they think, or a Likert scale of agree, strongly agree to strongly disagree, it's opinion. And so we can't run analysis of variance, t-test, or linear regression on that. We can simply use measures of central tendency. We can do a frequency distribution that tells us how many people answered on question 1, how many agree, how many strongly agree. We pert it out in our categories, and we can do a mean, median, and mode and standard deviation on that. But we can't do anything beyond that. Now, the only analysis that we can do on survey is chi-square. Remember, we can report using descriptive statistics. The only analysis that we can do is chi-square. And all it tells us is that, yes, this is a normal distribution. It's not an outlier population. That doesn't an outlier sample of the population, that this group that you pull, this sample, does reflect what we would expect to find in the larger population. It just speaks to basically sampling error. That's all chi-square does. It says, yep, you know, these findings represent a normal distribution of what we would expect to find from this population. So yes, this sample is a valid sample. What you always worry about when you don't have comparative groups to compare data from is that you hit that one little cluster, that one little outlier group, and that you think represents the bigger population that you can generalize their findings to, but they don't reflect that. So just like back in the day, I guess we still have them, I'm not sure. Back in the day, how did TV shows make it? They had two metrics in terms of who TV shows on the air. One was the overnight ratings of how many people watched, but the others were the Nielsen's. And what did the Nielsen's do? They could track TVs in certain families' homes to see what they watched. They paid you to do that if you were a Nielsen family. And what they did is they didn't have the statistical capability that we have now to analyze numbers as quickly and easy as we do. So they would pick households around the country, see what they would watch, and they would generalize those findings of that little sample that they were running to the bigger population. That if these families like this show, the bigger population would like these shows. We don't have to do that anymore because we can actually run the numbers now. We can crunch them. We can collect that data electronically and analyze it like that. But we couldn't do that 40 or 50 years ago. We did not have the capacity to do that.
You know how to pay jacks?
And so what we had to do was we had to pick a sample of people that represented. So they made sure that they picked people that were representative of certain groups that they were looking to target TV shows to. And so that they didn't get an outlier in that. So that's simply, that's how that works. And that's what chi-square does, is it figures out, is this group that you pulled and collected this survey data from, are they representative of the bigger group? That sample representative of the population. My favorite story is from politics is the 1972 election. If you'll remember, George McGovern ran against Richard Nixon in 1972. And McGovern lost all 50 states. Landslide victory for Nixon. And I was watching, I guess it was this week, with David Brinkley after that election. And the gag is they had a person on there who lived in Greenwich Village in New York. Does anybody know anything about Greenwich Village? It's probably the most liberal place in the United States. Always has.
New York.
In New York. And they had a person on there, and they were analyzing the results of the election. And the fellow said, I can't understand how he lost all 50 states. Everybody I know in my community voted for McGovern. Think about population and sample. Of course, everybody in his neighborhood, but was his neighborhood representative of that sample of the entire nation? Absolutely not. So, but if you'd only lived in that neighborhood and worked in the city in New York, and you didn't know what was going on or who people were in the rest of the country, you would have been completely shocked about the outcome of the election. Now, more modern politicians in the last, I'd say, 10 years have exploited that to their advantage by, claiming that, telling everybody in the flyover states that all the decisions in the country have been made on the coastal elites. And they've harvested those votes from people and their anger and disgruntlement because what they've claimed is here are the values of the country, but they're being misrepresented by either coast. That those do not represent the bigger population of America. I'll leave that for you to decide. But basically, what politicians have figured out is to claim that the game is rigged, that the sample does not represent the population, and so I'll leave you to figure that out. But that's what chi-square does for you. That's the only analytics that you can run on data. Now you can do descriptive statistics, present a frequency histogram or frequency distribution of how many people answered this, mean, median, and mode of that, and standard deviation. But that's just, that's that's measures of central tendency. You can report that, but the analytics for survey is only chi-square to make sure that your group that you surveyed is not an outlier group like Greenwich Village, so that you can generalize what you found from that group that you surveyed to the bigger population. That's very important. Now, I've walked into dissertation and seen people try to do analysis of variance or t-tests on survey data. That's a no-no because it's opinion. So understand that. All right. And then the last thing that we have as we coast into lunch here, our last thing is hypothesis. If my language offends you, I'll apologize up front. In our business, we refer to hypothesis as a swag, S-W-A-G. Anybody know what swag means?
Stupid, wild ass guess.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It's based on anecdotal information. I saw a bird drinking water. If that's not a stupid guess, I've never heard one. And I hypothesize that drinking water, there's a correlation between drinking water and flying. That's my hypothesis. And then I figure out a way to test it. I take Buku up on the roof and I make him drink water, and I throw him off. And then what do I find out at the end? There's no correlation between drinking water and flying. Everybody's happy now except for Buku. And the whole notion of that, as we coast in here is that you got to be careful. You can cause harm in some of these tests that you do. And that's what IRB is about, is causing no harm, being ethical, not, don't give incentives. Don't create bias. Don't hurt the people that you're collecting data from. Don't throw Buku off the roof. That's the notion here of harm and institutional review and the ethics of research is we create, first do no harm. And so that's why we call them swags, because some of them are stupid and they're just wild and reckless. So we have to take that wild, reckless idea and then convert it into research questions that are measurable. But we have to have rules. We can't do things that are deceptive or harmful in the name of, the ends justify the means. No, they don't. Let me be clear. The ends never justify the means. It is never okay to deceive or harm people. That's why we refer to hypotheses as swags. They're way out there. They don't care who they hurt or how ethical they are. That's why we convert them to research questions. And when we do that, we have to go by the rules of research. No harm, no deception, no paying for answers, no getting extra time or ignoring reliability and validity. No, baiting the field. Picking all the people we know who's. I went into a dissertation, and this lady, they'd hired her to do 1,100 elementary teachers in Winston-Salem to give them a math workshop. And so we said, well, how are you going to measure the effectiveness? We're going to ask 5 of my friends how they like the workshop. I can't make this up. Don't you think you would go and measure how well the kids did on the math test? That's the whole point of the staff development. We didn't pay for 1,100 teachers a bunch of money for 1,100 teachers to get trained to how to teach math better, just to see how they felt about it. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to improve math scores. And I said, well, you know, are you not going to measure the math scores? Oh, no, we don't know if they'll do any better or not. Wait, what? But we know our friends will say that it was great. That's real, folks. That happens. That's what we're talking about. You got to have things that are measurable. Your research questions, hypotheses can be as wild as you want, but research questions you have to have a way to measure what you think that association or correlation is without being deceptive, without being biased, without causing harm. Therein is the trick. That's the hard piece. That's the piece that's tough. That's toughest. That's the piece that's toughest, is to find out without hurting people and being ethical and honest. That's the hard part. And so what you risk, as you know, what you risk when your hypothesis testing is a type 1 or a type 2 error. That's what you risk. And when I say risk, this is where it's more of, this is what happens if, you know, the manipulation, the bias, those kinds of things. We're trying to get what we want. We're trying to find what we want to find. And so a type 1 error is we find something that's not there. That's the most common. We claim results that aren't there. Just like those ladies that, you know, one of them was paid to present this staff development. She wanted to report results that wasn't there. She didn't want to take the risk of measuring the actual kids' math scores. She wanted to ask 5 of her friends how they liked the staff development, and was going to declare it a success, you know, that it worked based on her friend's opinion. That's a false positive. That's results that you can't prove. And then we have the type 2 error, the false negative. You're not pregnant. You know, we deny the existence of something. This, unfortunately, as I've got 1 minute left, this unfortunately has been what has happened with COVID. There are 14 tests for COVID on the market. 11 of them give the type 2 errors. They find false negatives. Why have we allowed those 14 to stay on the market when we know 11 of them give false negatives? I had an article up, I closed it a few minutes ago. The rise of scams and those kinds of things in our country, all these people taking advantage and scamming, and what's going on now. Why is it that we have allowed, if there's 14 COVID tests and 11 of them give false negative, type 2 errors, why have we allowed them to stay on the market?
Just to probably hide the true number of people that have the COVID.
There you go. There you go. So what happens is we know that. We know that 11 of the 14 give false negatives, but that fits our narrative. That's what we want. We want the numbers to look less than they are.
We only redo the COVID negative test when we know that symptoms does not match what the result.
That's exactly right. Qualitative doesn't match quantitative. That's when, Houston, we have a problem. That's exactly right. That's why we do qualitative. Symptoms are qualitative. They're observable. The test is quantitative. When we know they don't match, we use a different test, and we use one that we know doesn't give a false negative, and guess what? Surprise, surprise, Gomer, you've got it. Because we want the numbers to be less. We want the numbers to be less because that fits our narrative. In a medical sense, you know, this stuff is life and death, folks. It's life and death for organizations, and COVID is life and death for us as people.